February 17, 2023. Palm Jumeirah, Dubai. The morning call to prayer had just faded across the city when housekeeping supervisor Fatima Nazir used her master key to check on a staff member who had failed to report for morning duties. What she discovered in the small servants' quarters at the edge of the Al-Fareed family compound would shatter the carefully constructed facade of one of Dubai's most prominent families and expose the deadly consequences when power, privilege, and betrayal collide behind closed doors. Marisol Diwata Lualhati's body lay on the tiled floor beside her narrow bed, the pooled blood beneath her having darkened from vibrant red to rust brown overnight. At 27 years old, the Filipina nanny who had traveled halfway across the world to support her family back home would never return to the coastal village in Batons, where 3 generations awaited her promised homecoming. More shocking to first responders than the brutality of the scene was the victim's clearly pregnant state, a condition that raised immediate questions about paternity in a household where the only adult male was Karim Al-Fareed, one of Dubai's most respected investment bankers with connections extending into the highest levels of Emirati society. "I knew something was wrong when she missed morning check-in," Fatima later told investigators in testimony that would be carefully scrubbed from official records. Marisol was never late, not once in 16 months with the family. Even when she was sick, she would message me first. This reliability made her absence from the 5:30 a.m. staff meeting immediately conspicuous, especially given the household's rigid protocols established by Nadia Al-Fareed, whose management of domestic affairs matched her husband's corporate precision. The Al-Fareed residence occupied the eastern frond of Palm Jumeirah, Dubai's iconic man-made island, where properties routinely sold for upwards of 50 million dirhams. The main villa featured 7 bedrooms, a private beach, infinity pool overlooking the Persian Gulf, and separate staff quarters designed to maintain appropriate distance between family and service personnel. Architectural magazines had featured the property's seamless blend of traditional Arabic design elements with ultramodern technology. Smart home systems controlled everything from temperature to security, with cameras monitoring all common areas and entry points. The family's prominence within Dubai's social hierarchy was the product of generations of careful relationship building. Karim Al-Fareed's grandfather had been among the early merchants who recognized the Emirates' potential long before oil transformed the coastal trading post into a global financial hub. His father had expanded family interests into international banking just as Dubai began its meteoric development in the 1990s. Karim himself, educated at London Business School and Harvard, had further elevated the family's standing through strategic investments in technology and real estate across 4 continents. At 43, he embodied the ideal of modern Emirati success, traditional values balanced with global sophistication, religious devotion alongside business pragmatism. His wife Nadia, 12 years his junior, came from equally distinguished lineage. Her father held ministerial position in the UAE government. Her mother descended from a prominent Saudi family with historical connections to the ruling class. Their marriage 8 years earlier had been celebrated across 3 days of festivities, attended by government officials, business elites, and select European dignitaries whose presence underscored the Al-Fareed's international connections. Their 3 children, twin boys aged 7 and a daughter aged 4, attended the exclusive Dubai International Academy where annual fees exceeded most household workers' yearly salaries. This was the rarefied world into which Marisol Diwata Lualhati had entered 16 months before her death. Arriving from a village where fishing boats still launched from beaches without harbors and many homes lacked consistent electricity. The contrast between her origins and her final workplace could hardly have been more pronounced, a disparity that characterized the experiences of thousands of Filipino workers who constituted a critical but largely invisible workforce across the Gulf states. Dubai police responded to the emergency call at 6:14 a.m., their response slowed by Palm Jumeirah's notorious morning traffic congestion. By the time Detective Saeed Al-Mansouri arrived at 6:47 a.m., the household had mobilized its considerable resources. The family's lawyer, Tariq Mahmood, was already present, having arrived before police. Security staff had established a perimeter around the servants' quarters. Most notably, Karim Al-Fareed had already departed for previously scheduled meetings in Abu Dhabi, according to staff statements, while Nadia remained sequestered in the main house's private wing with the children. The scene had been disturbed, Detective Al-Mansouri noted in preliminary reports. Someone had clearly entered after the initial discovery, but before police arrival. This observation, along with several others documenting evidence inconsistencies, would later disappear from official case files following intervention from unnamed government officials concerned about diplomatic sensitivities surrounding the investigation. What remained undeniable, despite subsequent efforts to sanitize the narrative, was Marisol's condition. Medical examiner Dr. Aisha Khalid confirmed the victim was approximately 30 weeks pregnant at time of death. The murder weapon, a crystal paperweight from Karim's office, had been used with such force that it caused catastrophic skull fracture. Most significantly for investigators, the killer had made no attempt to save the unborn child, despite the pregnancy being clearly viable. This detail suggested a crime motivated by elimination rather than heated confrontation. Someone had wanted both Marisol and her child permanently erased. Initial forensic assessment established time of death between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. the previous night. Security logs showed Nadia Al-Fareed accessing the staff quarters corridor at 11:22 p.m., ostensibly to check on the children's laundry, according to her initial statement. Camera footage from the corridor itself was mysteriously corrupted, a technical failure that technicians would later attribute to scheduled system maintenance despite no such maintenance appearing in regular service records. Most damning was the preliminary blood analysis performed at the scene. Blood spatter patterns indicated the attacker was significantly shorter than Karim Al-Fareed's 6'1" frame, matching instead someone closer to Nadia's 5'4" stature. Defensive wounds on Marisol's forearms suggested she had seen her attacker coming and attempted to shield herself, contradicting any scenario involving surprise attack or accident. These forensic details, compiled within hours of discovery, painted a picture of deliberate homicide likely committed by someone Marisol knew and had attempted to reason with before the attack turned violent. The pregnant state of the victim added layers of potential motivation that would soon lead investigators toward the household's internal dynamics and the dangerous triangle that had formed between employer, employee, and wife. But to understand how Marisol Diwata Lualhati came to die on the floor of a luxury compound 4,500 miles from home, carrying a child that would never draw breath, we must go back to the beginning of her journey, a path that started with hope but ended in tragedy that would send ripples through both Dubai's expatriate communities and the distant Philippine village that would never welcome her home. Baton's province occupies the northernmost reach of the Philippine archipelago, closer to Taiwan than to Manila, a place where fierce typhoons regularly isolate communities from the outside world. In the fishing village of Sivayan on Sabtang Island, the Lualhati family had harvested the sea for generations. Their modest home perched on volcanic slopes overlooking the Philippine Sea. This remote landscape shaped Marisol's childhood, a place of extraordinary natural beauty and limited economic opportunity, where leaving became a necessity for those seeking advancement beyond traditional livelihoods. Marisol's academic records from Baton's National High School showed consistent excellence despite challenging circumstances. Former teachers described a young woman with unusual determination and quiet leadership who walked 3 kilometers each way to school while maintaining top standing in her class. This academic performance earned her admission to nursing program at Baton State College in 2015, an achievement celebrated throughout her community as evidence that dedication could overcome economic limitations. She was always helping others with their studies, recalled her cousin Angelita, who shared a dormitory room during their first year of college. Even when she was exhausted from working part-time at the local clinic, she would stay up helping classmates understand difficult material. That's why nobody was surprised when she was offered the scholarship to complete her degree in Manila. This opportunity, full funding for nursing education at prestigious Far Eastern University in the capital, represented Marisol's clearest path toward professional credentials that could transform her family's circumstances. She completed 3 semesters with distinction before receiving news that would irrevocably alter her trajectory. Her father Ricardo had suffered a major stroke while at sea, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to continue fishing. With the family's primary income eliminated and 3 younger siblings still in school, Marisol faced an impossible calculation familiar to countless Filipino families. Her nursing education offered long-term promise but no immediate financial solution. The family home required significant modifications to accommodate her father's condition. Medical bills accumulated rapidly despite Philippines' limited healthcare coverage. Her mother Esperanza had already taken on additional work cleaning vacation rentals that occasionally appeared on their island, but this supplemental income covered barely half of essential expenses. She came to me after her father's second hospitalization. Father Domingo of St. Vincent Ferrer Parish told community members during memorial services. She wasn't asking for money. She knew our church had limited resources. She was asking for guidance about whether suspending her education to work abroad was morally acceptable when she had pledged to complete her nursing degree. I told her that supporting family in crisis is itself a form of healing work. The decision to seek overseas employment wasn't made lightly. Philippines' substantial economy of labor exportation offered clear financial advantages. Domestic worker positions in Gulf states provided monthly salaries exceeding what many college-educated professionals earned domestically. Recruitment agencies actively targeted promising students like Marisol, emphasizing immediate earnings over long-term professional development. The mathematical reality was undeniable. 2 years working abroad could generate sufficient savings for her father's medical needs, home modifications, siblings' education, and her own eventual return to nursing studies. Esperanza Lualhati initially opposed her daughter's decision. "You have a gift for healing," she reportedly told Marisol during family discussions. "The world needs nurses more than it needs maids." But practical realities eventually overcame resistance. When Sunshine Overseas Employment Agency offered placement with an Emirati family described as highly educated professionals with excellent treatment history, Marisol submitted her application with a 2-year plan clearly outlined. Earn, save, return, complete education. Her preparation for Dubai employment was thorough despite compressed time frame. Agency training included Arabic language basics, cultural orientation emphasizing Emirati customs and Islamic practices, household management standards for luxury properties, and childcare certification. Marisol's nursing background distinguished her application from thousands of others seeking similar positions, particularly her pediatric training, which aligned with the Al-Fareed family's request for someone qualified to assist with their young children's developmental needs. Manila International Airport processes thousands of departing overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, daily, a human export representing the nation's largest source of foreign currency. Marisol joined this exodus on October 10, 2021. Carrying a single suitcase containing practical belongings and multiple copies of family photographs secured in waterproof packaging. Airport security footage shows a young woman in neat business attire, notably more formal than typical domestic worker departures, reflecting her nursing background and professional aspirations despite temporary career detour. Her journey to Dubai, first commercial flight of her life, brought Marisol to a city that represented both opportunity and disorientation. The United Arab Emirates hosts approximately 1 million Filipino workers, predominantly in service sectors where their English fluency, education levels, and reputation for diligence make them preferred employees despite labor practices frequently criticized by human rights organizations. Within this system, domestic workers occupy particularly vulnerable positions, their legal status tied directly to employers through kafala sponsorship system, their daily existence often isolated within private households beyond regulatory oversight. The first message she sent after arriving showed how overwhelmed she felt. Her sister Lourdes shared from family's WhatsApp communication history. She described buildings taller than she could comprehend, more luxury cars in one parking lot than she'd seen in her lifetime, and temperatures so hot she felt like she was breathing through wet cloth. But she also wrote that the children were adorable, and the house had air conditioning colder than Baton's in December. Initial impressions of the Al-Fareed household appeared promising. Marisol's private accommodation, while small, included ensuite bathroom, television, and refrigerator amenities exceeding minimum requirements for domestic staff housing. Her contract specified 10-hour workdays with 1 full day off weekly, health insurance coverage, and annual leave terms that reflected the family's international connections and awareness of employment practices subject to greater scrutiny than local standards. Her primary responsibilities centered on childcare for the family's 3 children, with limited household duties focused on children's spaces rather than general housekeeping. Karim Al-Fareed's travel schedule created a household dynamic where Nadia managed day-to-day operations with minimal husband involvement except weekends. Staff hierarchy placed Fatima Nazir, the Pakistani housekeeping supervisor with 15 years service to the family, as Marisol's immediate superior. The household included 7 other staff members: a Bangladeshi cook, Indian driver, Filipino landscaper, Egyptian security guard, Ethiopian laundress, Kenyan housekeeper, and Nepalese maintenance worker, a multinational workforce typical of wealthy Emirati households where specific nationalities are preferred for particular roles based on cultural stereotypes about work aptitudes. Marisol's nursing background quickly became apparent in her childcare approach. Rather than merely supervising, she incorporated developmental activities, basic health monitoring, and educational elements that impressed Nadia during initial months. Financial records show Marisol received a performance bonus of 500 dirhams, approximately $135, after her 3-month probation period recognition of exceeding expectations and establishing trust with both children and parents. She transformed the twins' behavior. Vikram Patel, the family driver, later told investigators during unofficial questioning at his new employment location. Before Ms. Marisol arrived, they were typical spoiled rich kids, demanding, impatient. Within months, they were saying please and thank you, helping with simple tasks, showing consideration unusual for children in such wealthy families. Even Ms. Nadia commented on the improvement. This professional success coincided with consistent financial support flowing back to Baitons. Banking records document monthly remittances averaging 7,000 dirhams, $1,900, from Marisol's 9,500 dirham salary, an extraordinary percentage reflecting minimal personal expenditure and maximized family support. These transfers enabled her father's continued therapy, medication access, home modifications including wheelchair ramp installation, and maintained her siblings' educational expenses without interruption. The first documented change in household dynamics coincided with Ramadan 2022, approximately 7 months after Marisol's arrival. Karim Al-Fareed's usual travel schedule adjusted for religious observance, keeping him home for extended periods during the holy month. Staff schedules shifted to accommodate altered family routines during fasting periods, with Marisol's responsibilities including late-night childcare after evening prayers and gatherings that often continued until early morning hours. Security logs from this period show unusual patterns developing: Karim accessing children's areas during times the children would typically be asleep, remaining for periods exceeding normal parental checks. Staff scheduling adjustments requested directly by Karim rather than through Nadia or Fatima began appearing with increasing frequency, specifically regarding Marisol's assignments to family areas normally outside her regular responsibilities. Household communication systems, WhatsApp groups structured hierarchically for different staff classifications, show subtle shifts in tone and content during this period. Messages from Karim to Marisol transitioned from functional instructions regarding children to broader inquiries about her background, education, and personal interests. While individually unremarkable, collectively these communications established groundwork for a relationship extending beyond professional parameters. "I noticed Mr. Karim speaking with her differently," observed Ayana Desta, the Ethiopian laundress who worked alongside Marisol during morning children's routines. With other staff, his tone remained formal, detached. With Marisol, he became more personal, asking about Philippines, her studies, her family. "I warned her to be careful. Men like him don't just want conversation." The precise nature of their early interactions remains disputed in various accounts. Staff rumors suggested calculated seduction. Karim later claimed genuine emotional connection based on Marisol's intelligence and educational background. Forensic psychologists analyzing communication patterns identified classic grooming behaviors within power imbalance context. What remains undisputed is that by July 2022, approximately 9 months into Marisol's employment, their relationship had crossed professional boundaries into territory that placed her in increasingly vulnerable position. The pivotal moment reportedly occurred during family vacation to their secondary property in Ras Al Khaimah, UAE's northernmost emirate, where privacy exceeded even their Dubai compound. Staff accounts describe Nadia departing with the children to visit her parents in Abu Dhabi, while Karim remained behind, ostensibly for business meetings requiring proximity to Dubai. Marisol was selected to remain as skeletal staff while other employees received rare concurrent leave, an unusual arrangement that isolated them in the remote property without witnesses. Text messages recovered from Marisol's phone, preserved by her careful habit of backing up communications to cloud storage accessible to family in case of emergency, document increasing personal exchanges during this period. Karim's messages evolved from inquiries about educational background to philosophical discussions, literary references, and eventually explicit admiration framed as appreciation for qualities beyond beauty, including intelligence and compassion. These communications, while avoiding directly romantic language, established foundation for physical relationship through increasingly intimate conversation territories. "You understand things others don't see," read one message sent at 1:47 a.m. during Ras Al Khaimah stay. "I can speak with you about matters I cannot discuss with anyone else in my life. This connection is valuable to me beyond what I can express properly." Marisol's responses show evolution from professional politeness to increasingly personal engagement, a progression psychology experts recognize as common when prolonged attention comes from someone with absolute authority over one's livelihood. Her replies demonstrate internal conflict between maintaining professional boundaries and responding to rare recognition of her intellectual capabilities rather than merely functional labor value. "I appreciate your kindness," she wrote in one carefully worded response, "but I worry about misunderstanding. My position here is to care for your children, which I do with complete dedication. Other conversations should remain appropriate to our professional relationship." This boundary assertion appears to have accelerated rather than discouraged Karim's attention. Subsequent messages contain offers that establish dangerous pattern of gradual benefit extension, additional time off, increased salary, promises regarding assistance with eventually resuming nursing education, creating escalating debt dynamics that compromised Marisol's ability to maintain professional distance. The transition from inappropriate communication to physical relationship occurred during this isolated period, according to Marisol's private journal discovered hidden beneath her mattress after her death. The entry dated July 28, 2022 contains simple documentation rather than emotional elaboration. "It happened tonight. I have crossed a line I cannot uncross. God forgive me for my weakness. I don't know who I am becoming in this place so far from home." The complex psychological dynamics underlying this relationship defy simplistic categorization. Within extreme power imbalance between billionaire employer and financially vulnerable employee, questions of genuine consent become philosophically and legally problematic regardless of superficial appearances. Marisol's subsequent journal entries reveal persons struggling with competing priorities, financial responsibility toward family, personal moral framework, emotional confusion, and growing recognition of precarious position within household power structure. Upon families' return to Dubai compound following summer travels, Karim and Marisol's relationship continued within increasingly elaborate secrecy infrastructure. Their communication shifted to secondary phone provided by Karim, discovered during post-murder investigation hidden within hollow Islamic prayer book in Marisol's quarters, symbolism that investigators noted for its particularly calculated desecration of religious object to facilitate forbidden relationship. Security footage patterns reveal meetings in rarely used guest quarters during Nadia's regular Thursday shopping appointments, staff schedule adjustments creating overlapping free periods, and utilization of property areas with minimal surveillance coverage. These arrangements demonstrated Karim's intimate knowledge of household monitoring systems and staff routines, information unavailable to Marisol, but essential for maintaining secrecy within extensively monitored environment. What Marisol couldn't have anticipated was that these same surveillance systems would eventually expose their relationship through pattern recognition rather than direct evidence. Nadia Al-Fareed, educated in business analytics before marriage, approached household management with data-oriented perspective unusual in traditional Emirati households. Her regular reviews of security logs, staff scheduling patterns, and resource utilization initially designed to maximize household efficiency became tools for identifying statistical anomalies in her husband's movements and Marisol's assignments. The first documented suspicion appears in Nadia's personal calendar in October 2022, approximately 3 months after relationship began. A simple notation, verify schedule changes past 60 days. indicates initial recognition of patterns requiring investigation. Subsequent entries show escalating surveillance, including hiring private investigator ostensibly for household security review, whose actual assignment focused specifically on monitoring Karim and Marisol's movements, communications, and interactions. The discovery that would transform suspicion into deadly certainty occurred in early December 2022 when Nadia noticed subtle physical changes in Marisol's appearance. Staff laundry records reviewed during investigation revealed Marisol's uniform alterations requested in late November, slight loosening around waistline attributed to weight fluctuation, in written requests submitted to housekeeping department. This detail, combined with documented instances of morning illness dismissed as food sensitivity, presented constellation of symptoms immediately recognizable to someone familiar with pregnancy indicators. Rather than immediate confrontation, Nadia's response demonstrated calculation that would characterize her subsequent actions. Electronic records show her researching private medical testing facilities specializing in discrete DNA analysis, services catering to wealthy clients requiring confidentiality beyond standard medical privacy protocols, communications with biological verification services, operating from Dubai Healthcare City's medical free zone, document appointment scheduling followed by payment for comprehensive genetic analysis package on December 10, 2022. The method of sample collection revealed both determination and manipulation skills that investigators would later note as evidence of premeditated intent rather than emotional reaction. Nadia arranged supposedly routine health screenings for all household staff, citing insurance requirement changes, legitimate seeming pretext that enabled collection of Marisol's blood sample without raising suspicion. Karim's sample came from personal items including hairbrush and discarded razor collected from master bathroom. Test results confirming pregnancy and paternity were delivered to Nadia on January 23, 2023, approximately 3 weeks before Marisol's murder. The genetic analysis left no ambiguity regarding Karim's paternity, with 99.998% confirmation documented in technical report discovered in Nadia's personal safe during post-murder investigation. This scientific verification transformed suspicion into certainty, catalyzing sequence of events that would ultimately lead to violence rather than merely marital or employment consequences. What makes Nadia's response particularly chilling was its methodical patience rather than immediate reaction. Banking records show substantial cash withdrawal, 50,000 dirhams, approximately $13,600. The day following test results, followed by untraceable financial movements investigators believe funded various aspects of developing plan. Security system maintenance requests submitted through family's technical contractor scheduled routine upgrade for February 16, creating perfect explanation for camera malfunctions that would later prove convenient during critical investigation period. Most significantly, household staffing adjustments submitted by Nadia on February 1 created scheduling pattern that would ensure minimal witness presence on night of February 16 to 17. With key personnel including security supervisor and senior housekeeping staff assigned rare concurrent leave. These arrangements, appearing innocuous within complex household management system, created perfect conditions for confrontation that would occur with minimal risk of intervention or observation. Throughout this preparatory period, Marisol remained unaware of impending danger. Her communications with family continued normally, including plans for potential home visit later that year and discussions about father's improving medical condition. Her pregnancy, now approaching 3rd trimester, became increasingly difficult to conceal but remained unacknowledged in any official household context. A secret maintained through increasingly loose clothing and strategic positioning during interactions with family members. On February 15, 2023, security footage from the Al-Fareed compound captured what initially appeared to be routine morning activities. Marisol supervised the twins' breakfast while they practiced Arabic vocabulary, a priority in their educational development. Nadia reviewed household accounts in her private office, occasionally glancing at her phone when notifications arrived. Karim departed for his investment firm's downtown headquarters after a perfunctory goodbye to his children. His interaction with household staff limited to brief nod toward Fatima regarding evening arrangements for business associates visiting from London. Beneath this veneer of normalcy, 3 separate psychological realities operated in parallel. Marisol's journal entry that morning documented growing physical discomfort as her pregnancy advanced beyond 7 months, along with increasing anxiety about her unsustainable situation. "The baby moves constantly now," she wrote in Tagalog. "Especially at night when I speak to him. I tell him about Batons, about the ocean, about his grandmother who doesn't yet know he exists. I promised him today that before he arrives, I will find courage to secure our future somehow." Karim's digital communications that day revealed a man compartmentalizing with practiced efficiency. Financial presentations to Kuwaiti investors occupied his professional focus, while text messages to Marisol on their secret phone discussed potential arrangements for her return to Philippines with vague promises of ongoing support. These messages notably lacked any acknowledgement of personal responsibility beyond financial provision, a calculation of obligation based in transaction rather than emotional or moral commitment. Most significant were Nadia's activities, invisible to others but methodically documented through her meticulous planning habit. Her personal tablet, later recovered from a hidden safe in her dressing room, contained a document titled simply Resolution with timeline, resource requirements, and contingency plans organized with corporate precision. The schedule identified February 16th as implementation date, with notation about household staffing arrangements ensuring minimal witnesses during evening hours. The catalyst for this timeline appears linked to information Nadia received that morning, an email from family's legal representative confirming that her husband had recently modified his will with substantial provision for unspecified humanitarian foundation with separate executor outside family financial structures. This arrangement, while ostensibly philanthropic, created mechanism for supporting individuals without direct documentation in family accounts, a development Nadia correctly interpreted as preparation for providing for Marisol and her child while maintaining public deniability. At 2:17 p.m., household security systems recorded Nadia entering the compound's private mosque, a small but elegant structure adjacent to the main house used primarily by Karim for daily prayers when home. Staff accounts note she remained there for 43 minutes. An unusually long period given her typically brief religious observances. When she emerged, household staff reported subtle but noticeable change in her demeanor, a calm determination replacing weeks of tightly controlled tension. "She seemed almost peaceful," Ayana later told investigators, "which frightened me more than her anger would have. When someone with Ms. Nadia's temper becomes suddenly serene, it means decisions have been made, not that problems have been resolved." The confrontation sequence began at 9:42 p.m. after children were asleep and most staff had retired to quarters following dinner service for Karim's business guests. Security logs show Nadia accessing the monitoring center, ostensibly to check children's rooms, but actually to initiate the maintenance protocol that would disable specific camera feeds under guise of system update. This technical preparation created critical 90-minute surveillance gap, specifically encompassing the staff wing where Marisol's quarters were located. Text messages from the secondary phone show Karim contacting Marisol at 10:15 p.m. with unusual requests to bring specific children's medication to master suite, a deviation from protocol that would normally route such requests through housekeeping supervisor. This message, later analyzed by behavioral psychologists, appears designed specifically to create documented reason for Marisol to move through the house during late evening hours when she would typically remain in staff quarters. What Karim couldn't have known was that Nadia had already intercepted this communication pathway. The secondary phone provided to Marisol had been discovered during Nadia's methodical search of staff quarters 2 weeks earlier, while Marisol accompanied children to their equestrian lessons. Rather than confronting immediately, Nadia had installed monitoring software allowing her to view all communications while appearing undelivered to intended recipients, a sophisticated technical solution indicating premeditation beyond emotional reaction. At 10:22 p.m., Marisol left her quarters carrying the requested medication according to testimony from Vikram Patel, who observed her from the driver's accommodation where he was preparing vehicle logs for the following day. This would be the last time anyone saw her alive except her killer. Rather than finding Karim in the master suite as expected, Marisol encountered Nadia waiting in the family's private sitting room adjacent to children's wing. The initial interaction was captured by household audio systems that remained operational despite video surveillance interruption. The recording, later recovered despite attempts to delete it from security archives, begins with Marisol's confused greeting. "Mrs. Al-Fareed, I'm sorry. I thought Mr. Karim needed. He didn't send that message?" Nadia interrupted, her voice exhibiting unnatural calm. "I did, using his special phone. The one you keep hidden in your prayer book." Such creative sacrilege from someone who attends Mass every Sunday. The 18-minute recording documents conversation transitioning rapidly from Marisol's initial denial through attempted explanations to eventual acknowledgement as Nadia methodically presented evidence, text message histories, security footage showing patterns of clandestine meetings, and finally the DNA test results confirming both pregnancy and paternity beyond dispute. 30 weeks, Nadia stated with clinical detachment. "Approximately conceived during our Ras Al Khaimah stay when I conveniently visited my parents. How predictable of my husband to utilize such obvious opportunity. What I find less predictable is your participation, given your supposedly superior education and moral upbringing." Marisol's responses reveal escalating distress as pretense became impossible. "Please understand," she said at one point, voice trembling. "This was never intended. Intentions are irrelevant," Nadia interrupted. "Results are what matter. The result here is that you carry my husband's child while working in my home, caring for my children, and believing there might be some acceptable resolution to your extraordinary presumption." The recording captures Nadia's presentation of 3 options, each delivered with corporate efficiency. Immediate termination of pregnancy at private clinic with confidentiality guarantees and financial settlement, enabling Marisol's return to nursing education. Relocation to specified address in Philippines with lifetime support conditional upon permanent separation from child who would be raised by appropriate surrogate family in Europe, or refusal of these options resulting in immediate reporting to authorities for immigration violations and moral crimes carrying potential imprisonment. "You have until tomorrow evening to decide," Nadia concluded as recording ended. "Choose carefully, remembering that your family in Baytons depends entirely on your continued ability to support them. Consider which option allows that support to continue." What the audio recording couldn't capture was the critical interaction that occurred after formal recording ended, details that emerged only through Vikram's eventual testimony and forensic evidence. According to his account, provided months later from protection of new employment with diplomatic family, Marisol didn't immediately return to her quarters after this confrontation. Instead, security logs show her access card activating compound's rear garden gate at 10:57 p.m., followed by 37-minute period unaccounted for in any surveillance system. During this time, cell tower records indicate a call placed from Marisol's primary phone to Philippines, the only direct communication with her family that wasn't routed through monitored compound Wi-Fi. The call connected to her sister Lourdes' phone for approximately 4 minutes before signal degradation ended conversation. This call, occurring immediately after confrontation with explicit threats, suggests Marisol recognized the dangerous reality of her situation and attempted to establish external record of circumstances while technically outside household surveillance envelope. She called sounding terrified, Lourdes later testified through Philippine embassy representatives. She said if anything happened to her, we should know she was pregnant with her employer's child and his wife had threatened her. The connection was terrible, cutting in and out. The last thing I heard clearly was DNA test, before we lost signal completely. This external communication, establishing both pregnancy and explicit threat, represented significant risk to Nadia's carefully constructed control of the narrative. Cell records indicate Marisol's phone never reconnected to network after this call, suggesting immediate confiscation upon her return to compound. The phone itself was never recovered during investigation, one of several critical evidence items that disappeared between incident and official investigation. At 11:43 p.m., Marisol's access card registered final entry to her quarters in staff wing. Security footage, restored after supposed maintenance completion at midnight, shows no movement in staff wing corridors for approximately 90 minutes. At 1:17 a.m., shadowed figure appears briefly at corridor junction near Marisol's room, moving with apparent familiarity with camera positions to minimize exposure. Height analysis based on doorframe references suggests individual substantially shorter than Karim Al-Fareed, matching Nadia's physical profile. 3 minutes later, compound security system registered brief power fluctuation affecting external lighting, a common occurrence during Dubai's grid balancing operations, but suspiciously coinciding with critical timeline. When systems reinitialized 2 minutes later, no further movement appeared in corridors until morning discovery. Forensic analysis of Marisol's room revealed confrontation significantly more violent than careful planning preceding it would suggest. Blood spatter patterns indicated initial attack occurred near doorway, with Marisol apparently opening door to assailant she recognized rather than perceived as threat. The crystal paperweight used as weapon originated from Karim's office, a deliberate choice carrying symbolic significance, as it had been gifted by Nadia on their 5th anniversary, engraved with Arabic proverb about loyalty and trust. Most revealing was evidence of Marisol's desperate attempt to document circumstances before attack. Investigators discovered partially completed note hidden beneath bed, apparently written hastily after returning to room. If found, tell my family that Nadia Al-Fareed knows about baby. DNA test confirms Karim is father. She offered money to end pregnancy or give up baby. I refused. I fear she will. The note ended mid-sentence, suggesting interruption by assailant's arrival. This physical evidence, combined with Marisol's external communication and audio recording of initial confrontation, created circumstantial case against Nadia that would normally support criminal charges in most jurisdictions. However, the investigation that followed demonstrated how justice operates differently when applied to individuals with sufficient influence to shape its application. By dawn on February 17th, the Al-Fareed compound had transformed from crime scene to carefully managed crisis response center. Karim, summoned from business dinner by compound security rather than official authorities, arrived at 7:03 a.m. according to gate records, approximately 45 minutes after initial discovery, but notably before police had completed preliminary documentation of scene. This irregular sequencing allowed family to establish narrative framework before official investigation parameters solidified. The family's crisis response revealed practiced coordination indicative of contingency planning beyond typical household emergency procedures. Within 30 minutes of Karim's arrival, 3 separate response teams had mobilized: legal representation through the family's corporate firm, medical personnel from private hospital with discretionary reporting practices, and public relations specialists who had previously managed reputation issues for Emirati elites facing potential scandals. This rapid mobilization achieved critical objective before investigators could establish independent case framework, controlling information flow both within household and to external authorities. Staff were sequestered in central gathering area, where family representative Tariq Mahmood delivered prepared statement describing incident as tragic accident currently under investigation, while emphasizing confidentiality agreements each had signed upon employment. Detective Al-Mansouri, leading investigative team with 15 years experience in Dubai Police Major Crimes Division, encountered unprecedented resistance within investigation's first hours. His initial request to separate witnesses for independent statements was redirected through family's legal team, who cited employer responsibilities toward traumatized staff, while insisting on representative presence during all interviews. Procedural interference technically permissible under UAE labor regulations, but practically eliminating possibility of unfiltered testimony. Most concerning to veteran investigators was Nadia Al-Fareed's presentation during initial questioning. Rather than displaying emotional distress typical of household member discovering violent death on premises, she exhibited composed cooperation with precisely limited information provision. Behavior psychologists later identified as consistent with rehearsed crisis response rather than genuine shock reaction. I was asleep when security called about the discovery, she stated in initial interview conducted in compound's guest reception area rather than police headquarters as protocol would dictate. My husband was at business dinner downtown. I had minimal interaction with Marisol yesterday beyond normal household coordination. We had no conflicts or unusual conversations. This account directly contradicted audio evidence from security system and witness observations of confrontation preceding murder, contradictions that would normally trigger immediate investigative focus on suspect. However, within hours of investigation's commencement, Detective Al-Mansouri received unprecedented communication from department superiors instructing cultural sensitivity and diplomatic consideration in case handling. with specific directive to conduct all interviews on-site rather than station. The investigation's critical compromise occurred at 2:30 p.m. when Dubai's Assistant Chief of Police arrived personally at compound, extraordinary procedure for homicide case not involving government officials. His 40-minute closed-door meeting with Karim Al-Fareed and family representatives concluded with new investigative parameters requiring all evidence processing through specific forensic team and case classification as deceased foreign worker, cause undetermined, rather than standard homicide designation. These procedural modifications effectively removed case from normal investigative channels while maintaining appearance of thorough examination. The specialized forensic team, ostensibly selected for expertise, systematically minimized evidence contradicting accident or suicide narratives, while emphasizing elements supporting non-homicidal interpretation. Their preliminary report highlighted Marisol's pregnancy as potential motivation for self-harm, while discounting defensive wounds as possibly self-inflicted, conclusions contradicting basic forensic principles but aligning with preferred resolution for powerful family. The investigation's redirection became unmistakable when evidence began disappearing from official documentation. The secondary phone containing communication history between Karim and Marisol, initially logged in evidence inventory, vanished before technical analysis. Security recordings covering critical time periods were corrupted during transfer to police systems. Blood evidence collected from scene yielded inconclusive results, despite commercial DNA testing facility having previously established paternity with same reference samples. Perhaps most telling was systematic suppression of witness testimonies contradicting official narrative. Vikram Patel's initial statement describing Marisol's distress following meeting with Nadia was excluded from case file as hearsay without evidentiary value. Ayana's observations regarding Nadia's behavior changes disappeared from transcript before official filing. Fatima's detailed account of household schedule anomalies was reduced to generic statement confirming Marisol's employment history without contextual observations. These investigative irregularities might have succeeded in completely redirecting case outcome if not for single-factor outside family's control. Marisol's final phone call to her sister in Philippines. This international communication created documentation beyond UAE jurisdiction, evidence Nadia couldn't have anticipated when believing all communications remained contained within monitored systems under family influence. Lord Lualhati, recognizing the significance of her sister's frightened final communication, contacted Philippine Overseas Worker Welfare Administration immediately following news of Marisol's death. This government agency, experienced with suspicious deaths of Filipino workers abroad, initiated parallel investigation through diplomatic channels while engaging international worker rights organizations with established monitoring capabilities in Gulf states. The resulting pressure created unprecedented scrutiny of case normally processed with minimal external oversight. Philippine embassy representatives demanded autopsy observation by independent pathologist, request initially denied but eventually granted after diplomatic escalation involving trade relationship implications. This independent examination documented definitive evidence of homicide including defensive injuries inconsistent with self-harm, impact angles impossible in self-inflicted scenario, and precise documentation of pregnancy consistent with timeline in Marisol's communications. Diplomatic involvement transformed investigation from routine processing to international incident with potential repercussions beyond single family's reputation. Embassy officials formally requested criminal investigation under proper protocols, citing specific evidence contradicting accident classification. International media organizations began reporting case details that local outlets carefully avoided, creating information environment beyond families' conventional influence channels. The investigation's most significant breakthrough came from unexpected source 3 weeks after murder. Vikram Patel, the family driver who had observed Marisol's movements on critical evening, disappeared from compound during routine shopping excursion. Rather than returning with household supplies, he appeared at Philippine Embassy requesting protection while offering complete testimony regarding observations from night of murder and subsequent evidence tampering he had witnessed during investigation. His detailed statement, recorded by embassy officials and immediately transmitted to diplomatic channels outside UAE jurisdiction, provided critical timeline confirmation impossible to dismiss as misinterpretation or confusion. Most significantly, he produced personal recording of conversation between Karim and Nadia the morning after murder documentation made on his phone, while transporting them to meeting with legal representatives. This recording captured Nadia describing confrontation with Marisol in terms directly contradicting her official statements. She refused both options, Nadia stated in recording. Said she would rather return home disgraced than give up her child or end the pregnancy. Claimed some moral high ground about baby's right to no father. As if her Philippine village values have any relevance to our situation. Karim's recorded response revealed both knowledge of circumstances and active participation in subsequent cover-up. The investigators have been managed. Official finding will be suicide from distress over unwed pregnancy. Family will receive standard compensation package with appropriate documentation preventing further claims. This situation is contained. This recording, authenticated by technical analysis outside UAE, created evidence meeting criminal prosecution standards that couldn't be dismissed through local influence channels. Combined with forensic inconsistencies, witness statements, and Marisol's documented communication before death, the case against Nadia Al-Fareed transformed from circumstantial to substantive despite extraordinary efforts to redirect investigation. The final escalation occurred when international human rights organizations published comprehensive report documenting pattern of suspicious deaths among household workers in UAE with focus on pregnancy-related cases. This report, released through international channels beyond local censorship capacity, identified Marisol's case as exemplifying systematic vulnerabilities within kafala sponsorship system while explicitly naming Al-Fareed family and detailing evidence suggesting deliberate homicide and subsequent cover-up. Faced with international scrutiny beyond conventional management channels, UAE authorities initiated formal review of investigation through Special Prosecutor's Office 5 weeks after murder. This procedural shift, while maintaining appearance of sovereign judicial independence, effectively reopened investigation under parameters more aligned with standard protocols than family-influenced exceptions. The announcement of formal murder charges against Nadia Al-Fareed came exactly 7 weeks after Marisol's death. Extraordinarily delayed timeline by international standards but unprecedented accountability within system typically insulating wealth from conventional justice application. The charging documents cited overwhelming forensic evidence and credible witness testimony, establishing both motive and opportunity, while specifically referencing DNA evidence confirming pregnancy resulted from relationship with Karim Al-Fareed. This formal acknowledgement of circumstances surrounding murder demolished carefully constructed narrative the family had attempted to establish. Rather than tragic accident or desperate suicide, official charges confirmed what Filipino worker community had recognized immediately. Marisol Diwata Lualhati had been killed because her pregnancy threatened family reputation within cultural context where appearance often supersedes reality and power routinely overrides justice. Karim faced lesser charges as accessory after fact rather than co-conspirator. Legal distinction reflecting assessment, he participated in cover-up but not planning or execution of murder itself. This charging decision, while technically appropriate given evidence, nonetheless reflected continuing influence gradient, where husband's reputation received greater protection than wife's despite both participating in events leading to Marisol's death. The case's public dimension expanded dramatically following formal charges, with international media examining not just specific murder but broader patterns of vulnerability within migrant domestic worker systems throughout Gulf region. Marisol's story, documented through family photos, academic records, and personal journals, transformed from statistical entry in worker death records to humanized narrative challenging systemic inequities that enabled her murder and nearly permitted its concealment. Perhaps most significant was impact within Filipino communities across UAE and neighboring states. Domestic workers organized memorial services combining Catholic traditions with Filipino cultural elements, creating public acknowledgement of loss typically invisible within expatriate labor systems. These gatherings, while ostensibly religious observances permissible under local regulations, functioned as silent protests against vulnerability faced by approximately 1 million Filipino workers throughout region. As criminal proceedings advanced toward trial phase, the story expanded beyond individual tragedy to examination of intersecting systems that created conditions for both relationship and subsequent murder. International observers noted how economic disparities, immigration restrictions, gender expectations, and cultural taboos combined to transform pregnancy, normally celebrated life event, into catalyst for violence when occurring outside approved social parameters. The Al-Fareed case forced uncomfortable recognition that justice operates differently across social boundaries, even within systems claiming equal application of law. Without international attention generated by Marisol's sister's advocacy, diplomatic intervention, and Vikram's courageous testimony, her death would likely have joined hundreds of others classified as accident, suicide, or health crisis without meaningful investigation or accountability. On September 12, 2023, nearly 7 months after Marisol Lualhati's murder, the Criminal Court of Dubai convened for what local media carefully described as a case of significant public interest, while international outlets more directly labeled the Al-Fareed murder trial. The proceedings took place in the judicial complex adjacent to Dubai's financial district, modern architecture of glass and steel designed to project transparency while security protocols ensured tightly controlled access, reflecting the Emirates' careful balance between international legal standards and local cultural sensitivities. The courtroom itself represented this duality, contemporary design featuring advanced technology for evidence presentation alongside traditional elements including judges' bench elevated significantly above other participants, symbolizing authority derived from both secular law and religious tradition. Access required multiple security screenings, with separate entrances for judiciary, defendants, and public observers. International media received limited allocation of 20 observer positions, distributed among organizations from 12 countries, with Philippine outlets guaranteed representation through diplomatic negotiation. Nadia Al-Fareed entered courtroom through secured judicial passage rather than public corridors, procedural accommodation reflecting her family's status rather than legal requirement. Her appearance marked stark contrast from public image cultivated through social media and charity functions. Gone were designer clothes and carefully styled presentation. Instead, she wore simple dark blue dress with minimal jewelry and subdued makeup, presenting image of dignified modesty consistent with conservative Emirati values rather than cosmopolitan sophistication previously defining her public persona. Karim Al-Fareed, facing lesser charges of evidence tampering and obstruction rather than direct murder involvement, entered separately, physically distanced from his wife through seating arrangements that visually reinforced their now legally distinct positions. His business attire and composed demeanor projected confidence inconsistent with gravity of proceedings, body language experts later noting his apparent expectation of favorable outcome despite significant evidence. Most poignant presence was Esperanza Lualhati, Marisol's mother, who had traveled from Batons with support from Philippine Overseas Workers Welfare Administration and advocacy organizations. Her traditional Filipino mourning attire, simple black dress with small wooden cross, created visual counterpoint to Al-Fareed's calculated presentation. Throughout proceedings, she carried laminated photograph showing Marisol in nursing school uniform, silent reminder of promised future, destroyed by events unfolding through legal testimony. The prosecution team, led by State Prosecutor Hassan Mahmood with special appointment from Attorney General's office reflecting case sensitivity, presented methodical case beginning with comprehensive timeline reconstruction. Digital evidence, including compound security logs, phone records, and financial transactions established pattern contradicting accident or suicide narratives, while systematically connecting Nadia to crime scene during critical time period. Forensic testimony from both original investigation team and independent experts engaged through diplomatic channels confirmed homicide determination through multiple evidence sources including blood spatter analysis, wound characteristics inconsistent with self-infliction, and defensive injuries documented during autopsy. Most compelling prosecution evidence came through audio recording recovered from security system despite deletion attempts, technical testimony explaining how digital security specialists retrieved file fragments from system backup archives maintaining partial record of conversation between Nadia and Marisol hours before murder. The recording, played in courtroom with English and Arabic transcription displayed on monitors, captured Nadia's explicit threats regarding pregnancy, offering options that established clear motive when rejected by Marisol. The defendant's voice confirms not only knowledge of the victim's pregnancy but explicit threatening response to this condition, Prosecutor Mahmood stated during evidence presentation. This recording documents both motive and premeditation elements required for murder charge rather than lesser manslaughter consideration. Defense strategy, implemented by prominent attorney Zayed Al-Abdullah, whose previous clients included royal family members and government ministers, focused on contextual reframing rather than evidence denial. Rather than disputing technical elements establishing Nadia's presence or actions, defense constructed narrative of temporary psychological distress creating diminished capacity, legal approach seeking manslaughter classification rather than premeditated murder. My client discovered devastating betrayal within her home, sacred space in our culture. Al-Abdullah told the three-judge panel. A trusted employee carrying her husband's child represented violation beyond Western comprehension, attacking family honor in manner that provokes extreme emotional response in even the most balanced individual. This cultural context defense reflected calculated appeal to traditional values within UAE judicial system while avoiding direct challenge to substantial evidence establishing factual timeline. Expert witnesses, including prominent psychiatrist from Saudi Arabia's King Faisal Specialist Hospital, testified regarding honor reaction syndrome, controversial diagnosis not recognized in international psychiatric standards but occasionally referenced in regional legal proceedings involving family reputation defenses. The prosecution countered this narrative through methodical demonstration of planning elements inconsistent with impulsive emotional response. Financial records documented cash withdrawals and transfers preceding murder by weeks rather than hours. Security system maintenance scheduling demonstrated advanced preparation to create surveillance gaps during critical period. Communications with private medical facilities regarding discrete pregnancy testing established knowledge of situation well before confrontation, contradicting sudden discovery narrative. Most damaging to defense claims of impulsive response was evidence recovered from Nadia's tablet, detailed planning document with multiple scenario projections, contingency arrangements, and systematic evaluation of potential outcomes based on different approaches to situation. This document, created 3 weeks before murder according to metadata analysis, included explicit consideration of potential legal consequences with assessment that family connections sufficient to manage investigative outcome regardless of scenario implementation. This is not documentation of emotional distress, Prosecutor Mahmoud argued during evidence summation. This is calculated project management applied to homicide planning, demonstrating clear premeditation and awareness of action's legal implications with expectation that influence would prevent accountability. Throughout 2-week trial, Karim Al-Fareed maintained carefully constructed position as secondary figure despite evidence establishing his central role in circumstances leading to murder. His testimony acknowledged relationship with Marisol but characterized it as mutual emotional connection, rather than exploitation of power differential. He denied knowledge of his wife's actions while admitting participation in subsequent evidence management, positioning himself as responding to family crisis rather than orchestrating criminal conspiracy. This partial acknowledgement strategy, recommended by separate defense counsel specializing in reputation management for prominent clients, aimed to separate his legal culpability from Nadia's while preserving possibility of maintaining family and business connections after legal proceedings concluded. Financial records presented during trial revealed significant asset restructuring in months following murder charges, transactions creating distance between personal holdings and broader family investments, while establishing independent management structures operating outside UAE jurisdiction. The trial's most unexpected dimension emerged through witness testimony establishing pattern beyond isolated incident. 3 former household employees from prominent Emirati families testified anonymously behind privacy screen, extraordinary accommodation granted through judicial discretion, describing similar situations where pregnant domestic workers disappeared under suspicious circumstances, with investigations minimized through financial settlements and diplomatic pressure. These testimonies, secured through international worker rights organizations, contextualized Marisol's case within broader pattern typically hidden from public scrutiny. These are not isolated incidents, testified a representative from International Labor Watch whose identity remained protected through court order. Our organization has documented 27 cases since 2015 involving pregnant domestic workers who died under suspicious circumstances within Gulf Cooperation Council countries. In 23 cases, investigations concluded without charges despite substantial evidence contradicting official findings. This pattern evidence, while technically peripheral to specific charges against Nadia and Karim, significantly influenced public perception of proceedings. International media coverage increasingly characterized case as representative example of systematic vulnerability rather than isolated criminal incident, creating diplomatic pressure for demonstration of judicial independence despite defendants' connections. The defense's closing arguments reflected recognition of shifting narrative disadvantage, pivoting from cultural context justification toward pragmatic separation between established facts and legal culpability assessment. Attorney Al-Abdullah conceded Nadia's confrontation with Marisol while maintaining that subsequent events resulted from emotional distress rather than predetermined plan, arguing for manslaughter classification with minimum sentencing consideration based on family circumstances and previous community contributions. Karim's separate closing position further distanced him from direct involvement, his attorney emphasizing distinction between regrettable personal choices and criminal liability, while characterizing his post-incident actions as misguided family loyalty rather than deliberate obstruction. This strategic divergence between defendants created implicit acknowledgement that joint defense had become untenable given evidence establishing Nadia's primary role in both planning and execution. The prosecution's final presentation systematically connected evidence points establishing unbroken chain from discovery of pregnancy through testing confirmation, confrontation, murder, and attempted cover-up, timeline demonstrating methodical progression inconsistent with temporary emotional distress defense. Most powerful element was juxtaposition of Nadia's detailed planning document against Marisol's final desperate note, attempting to document threats before her murder, creating stark contrast between calculated execution and terrified victim anticipating violence with no protection or escape option. The evidence before this court establishes not just that Nadia Al-Fareed killed Marisol Lualhati, prosecutor Mahmoud concluded, but that she did so with extensive planning, clear intent, and expectation that her family's influence would prevent any meaningful consequence for eliminating someone she viewed as dispensable threat to reputation rather than human being deserving protection under law. On September 26, after 3 days of deliberation, the judicial panel delivered verdict that surprised observers familiar with typical outcomes in cases involving prominent families. Nadia Al-Fareed was found guilty of premeditated murder, receiving 25-year sentence, among longest ever imposed on defendant of her social standing in UAE history. Karim Al-Fareed received 5-year sentence for evidence tampering and obstruction of justice, with additional financial penalties including compensation to Lualhati family equivalent to approximately $2.4 million USD. The verdict announcement triggered immediate international coverage focusing on unprecedented accountability for wealthy defendants within system typically offering protection through influence and connections. Legal analysts characterized outcome as potential inflection point in Gulf region's treatment of domestic worker protections, noting explicit judicial rejection of cultural defense regarding family honor as justification for violence against vulnerable employees. What media coverage couldn't capture was the silent response in Baton's village where Marisol's family received news via community gathering at St. Vincent Ferrer Parish. Esperanza Lualhati, watching verdict announcement through video call arranged by Philippine Embassy, responded with simple statement later quoted in international coverage. "Money cannot replace my daughter. Prison cannot return her life. All I pray is that other mothers sending daughters to foreign lands might find better protection than my Marisol received." The case's resolution through conventional judicial process rather than negotiated settlement represented significant deviation from established patterns for similar situations. This exceptional outcome resulted from unique convergence of factors typically absent in domestic worker death investigations. International diplomatic pressure sustained through Philippine government advocacy, evidence documentation beyond local jurisdiction control, media attention spanning multiple countries, and crucially, witness testimony breaking traditional silence surrounding such incidents. For the Filipino domestic worker community throughout Gulf region, the verdict created complicated emotional responsive validation of long-recognized vulnerability, alongside painful awareness that Marisol's case received justice precisely because its circumstances proved exceptional rather than typical. The thousands attending memorial masses across UAE demonstrated both solidarity and recognition that systemic vulnerabilities remained largely unaddressed despite single cases' visible resolution. The formal conclusion of criminal proceedings against Nadia and Karim Al-Fareed on September 26, 2023 marked legal resolution, but only beginning of complex aftermath extending across multiple domains, From banking offices in Dubai's financial district to government ministries in Manila to fishing village in distant Batons where Marisol's family navigated grief complicated by international attention and unexpected financial considerations. Appeal processes initiated by both defendants' legal teams proceeded through UAE's tiered judicial system with predictable procedural thoroughness but limited practical effect. The Cassation Court's April 2024 ruling maintained original convictions while reducing Nadia's sentence from 25 to 20 years based on technical reconsideration of premeditation evidence, adjustment reflecting system's careful balance between demonstrating accountability and maintaining traditional consideration for prominent families. Karim's separate appeal yielded no sentence reduction but established important distinction regarding financial obligations, with court determining that compensation to Lualhati family constituted personal, rather than family business liability. This technical classification carried significant implications for asset recovery, preventing protection through corporate structures established during pretrial period. Financial dimensions extended far beyond court-ordered compensation. The Al-Fareed family's international business interests experienced immediate consequences as European and American financial institutions initiated reputation risk reviews following murder conviction. Major investment partners including Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund and Japanese technology conglomerate suspended joint venture discussions pending governance assessment, creating tangible economic impact extending beyond individual defendants to broader family holdings. Banking records reviewed during civil proceedings revealed systematic restructuring initiated immediately following Marisol's death, asset transfers, ownership reorganization, and jurisdiction diversification designed to insulate family wealth from potential liability. These arrangements, while legally executed, created documentary evidence of anticipatory financial planning inconsistent with claimed surprise regarding circumstances, further undermining accident or impulsive action narratives. The Lualhati family's experience following verdict demonstrated how justice extends beyond courtroom resolution, particularly across extreme economic disparities. The $2.4 million compensation award, unprecedented amount for domestic worker death case, created immediate practical challenges for family with limited financial literacy and no previous banking relationships beyond basic remittance accounts. Predatory financial advisors emerged within days of verdict announcement, offering assistance with compensation management while proposing arrangements that would have diverted substantial portions to various intermediaries. Protection came through unexpected alliance between Philippine Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, international labor rights organizations, and ethical financial advisors who established structured support system including immediate needs provision, educational trust for Marisol's siblings, medical coverage for her father's ongoing rehabilitation, community development fund for Batons Village, and long-term investment management designed for sustainable support rather than rapid depletion. Esperanza Lualhati's approach to unexpected financial resources revealed value system transcending economic considerations. Rather than lifestyle enhancement or relocation to larger urban center, family maintained traditional Batons residence while establishing memorial scholarship funds supporting nursing education for local students unable to afford professional training, living tribute to Marisol's interrupted career aspirations. "My daughter left home to help others through healing work," Esperanza explained during scholarship announcement covered by Philippine media. "Though this path was denied her, we ensure others may walk it carrying her memory forward through service to those in need." For the Al-Fareed family beyond convicted individuals, aftermath involved complex reputation management across multiple constituencies. Public statements emphasized distinction between individual actions and broader family values, while highlighting established charitable activities and business contributions to Emirati economy. Private efforts focused on relationship maintenance with government officials and business partners, leveraging generations of connection development to preserve operational capabilities despite reputational damage. Most revealing were systematic changes to household employment practices implemented across extended family properties. Adjustments never publicly acknowledged but documented through employment contracts reviewed by labor monitoring organizations. New provisions included expanded healthcare coverage specifically addressing reproductive health, formal communication channels outside household supervision, structured grievance procedures through third-party monitoring, and enhanced privacy protections regarding personal communications and living spaces. These operational modifications, while providing meaningful protection improvements for household staff, remained entirely voluntary arrangements without regulatory enforcement mechanism. Their implementation reflected pragmatic risk management rather than ethical recalibration, focused on preventing similar situations that might generate negative attention rather than addressing fundamental power imbalances within domestic employment relationships. For Dubai's substantial Filipino community, approximately 750,000 workers across various sectors, the case created momentary visibility for concerns typically relegated to private discussions within churches and community gatherings. Embassy-organized information sessions regarding worker rights saw unprecedented attendance during months following verdict, with particular focus on documentation preservation, emergency communication protocols, and support network development outside employer control. The Philippine government leveraged international attention surrounding case to advance diplomatic negotiations regarding bilateral labor agreements with UAE and neighboring Gulf states. Resulting Memorandum of Understanding signed in May 2024 established enhanced protections including mandatory rest periods, communication access guarantees, healthcare standards with specific reproductive health provisions, and most significantly, modified complaint mechanism allowing worker representation during dispute resolution processes. While implementation remains subject to practical enforcement limitations, these formal provisions created accountability framework previously absent from bilateral relationships. Beyond specific policy changes, the case's most enduring impact emerged through narrative transformation regarding overseas domestic workers throughout sending and receiving countries. Media coverage extending beyond initial murder and trial details increasingly examined systemic factors creating vulnerability, economic pressures driving migration, regulatory gaps in protection frameworks, enforcement limitations across jurisdictional boundaries, and cultural attitudes regarding domestic labor that frequently minimize human dignity considerations beneath functional utility assessment. Documentary projects developed by international film collectives with participation from worker communities captured perspectives typically excluded from official narratives. Invisible Hands, premiered at 2024 Singapore International Film Festival, combined testimony from current and former domestic workers across 5 Asian countries with analysis from labor rights experts, creating comprehensive examination of structural vulnerabilities within global care economy. The film's opening sequence featured Marisol's story as representative example while emphasizing thousands of similar situations receiving minimal attention or accountability. Academic research initiatives at University of Philippines and American University of Sharjah developed comprehensive documentation of domestic worker mortality patterns across Gulf Cooperation Council nations, establishing first statistically valid assessment of suspicious death incidents previously tracked only through informal advocacy networks. Their findings, published in prestigious International Labor Review, demonstrated statistically significant correlation between pregnancy and unexplained death classifications among household workers, empirical validation of patterns previously dismissed as anecdotal despite worker community awareness. For investigative professionals involved in original case, professional consequences reflected complex interplay between accountability and institutional self-protection. Detective Al-Mansouri, whose initial investigation faced interference from superiors, received transfer to administrative position officially described as career advancement opportunity, but widely recognized as sidelining following his documented resistance to investigation constraints. Conversely, the forensic technician who preserved crucial digital evidence despite deletion attempts received silent professional advancement while maintaining careful public distance from case details, bureaucratic acknowledgement of ethical conduct without explicit endorsement potentially challenging institutional hierarchies. Perhaps most significant long-term development emerged through educational initiatives within both Filipino sending communities and UAE receiving context. Philippine educational curriculum for prospective overseas workers expanded beyond practical skills to include comprehensive rights education, documentation practices, communication security, and support network development. Within UAE, university programs in business and public administration incorporated case studies examining ethical dimensions of domestic employment practices beyond technical compliance considerations. Marisol Diwata Lualhati's individual story, from nursing student to murder victim, gradually transformed from media sensation to educational reference point, her experience informing training materials, policy discussions, and worker protection initiatives across multiple countries. This narrative evolution represented perhaps the most meaningful justice available within systems where structural inequalities remained despite individual case accountability. In Baton's province, tangible legacy took form through nursing scholarship program bearing Marisol's name, supporting students completing education she had been forced to abandon. The program's first graduating class in 2025 included 7 nurses who cited Marisol's story as inspiration for both career choice and commitment to vulnerable population service. Their graduation ceremony, attended by Esperanza Lualhati and covered by national media, included reading of journal entry found among Marisol's possessions following her death. I measure success not through money earned abroad, but through service provided when I return home with proper training. Temporary sacrifice becomes meaningful when it creates permanent healing capacity for others. This is the balance I seek. Present difficulty creating future possibility. Personal challenge enabling community benefit. This articulation of values transcending individual circumstances perhaps best captures why Marisol's story resonated beyond typical true crime narrative boundaries. Her journey embodied tensions familiar to millions navigating global economic systems where opportunity and vulnerability intertwine, where family responsibility competes with personal safety, where systems theoretically providing protection frequently fail those most requiring their function. For the millions of domestic workers crossing international boundaries seeking economic opportunity while navigating vulnerability, Marisol's case represents exception precisely because accountability occurred rather than typical pattern where justice remains theoretical rather than practical reality. The systemic factors creating her vulnerability, economic pressure, power imbalance, inadequate protection mechanisms, cultural attitudes minimizing domestic worker humanity, continue shaping countless similar situations resolved without equivalent visibility or accountability. The ultimate measure of justice in Marisol's case extends beyond courtroom verdict or financial compensation to question whether structural conditions enabling her murder have meaningfully changed for others occupying similar positions. By this standard, progress remains limited despite individual case resolution, incremental policy adjustments, and enhanced awareness representing beginning steps rather than systemic transformation in how domestic workers experience protection within global care economy. Perhaps most revealing assessment came through private reflection shared by Vikram Patel, whose testimony proved crucial in securing conviction despite personal risk. In interview conducted following his relocation to Canada through Refugee Program for witnesses facing retaliation risk, he observed, "Justice happened in Marisol's case not because systems worked properly, but because they failed in visible way that couldn't be hidden. True justice would mean protection preventing murder rather than punishment following it, prevention that remains unavailable to thousands facing similar vulnerability behind closed doors where no one witnesses their struggle."